What's going on, everybody? It's Joe from the Acceptable Casualties here to do a tactical video for you guys for Strelkovy Battalion. I'm going to be mostly focusing on the defensive deployments for how I like to play them as far as aggressive deployment, passive deployment, and then doing a little bit on how I like to attack with them, as well as supporting units inside the list. There's not a lot of terrain on the table. It's really just me explaining how I like to play, and then maybe this can help you guys out a little bit if you're a newer Strelkovy player or haven't really run the list as a Russian player. For veteran players out there, I don't know if there's gonna be anything that you guys are gonna be able to use out of this. I mean, maybe there will be, but I would like some feedback too from some of you guys. Might have some alternate ideas or some better support options that I can run with this list, or just ideas in general as far as how Strelkovy Battalion runs, and it can maybe help me out in some of my later games as well. So I'm gonna put this out there. You guys can pick it apart, tear it apart, use what you guys want to use out of it. Maybe don't use anything, and then you just want to give me some feedback on how I can run this list a little bit better, and then we'll just take it from there, I guess. So I'm going to go over to the table, go over the attack, defense, everything that goes with it, and I guess we'll get to the learning. Let's learn a little bit.
So here is my basic setup for an aggressive deployment for when I'm defending with my Strelkovy. My train of thought with this is to kind of push the blob up and create a bubble wrap around that objective and get close to the middle of the table with that front line of infantry. I try to spearhead the whole formation with an MG42 and then usually SMGs in that front row. And then the second line, I like to slip in my sappers, and then if I have other units put in like the 45 millimeters or anti-tank guns, I kind of just try to trickle them in there wherever they seem fit. This is only 2 platoons as well. I usually run 3 platoons, but I just did this for learning purposes right here. So the reason that I usually try to set up this when I'm defending is in a lot of the defensive missions, the attacker needs to get within 16 inches of your objective. And a lot of the time, if you're sitting back too deep on the objective, tanks, any kind of vehicles can kind of park out there, and they can just start plugging away at your infantry, and you really don't have an answer to it if you've already lost your field guns or if your tanks are whittled down or anything like that. And you almost put yourself in a losing position late game because you're going to have to come out of those foxholes. You're going to have to usually get 1 or 2 turns of movement just to even get the opportunity to assault. And if you run Strelkovy, you know it's pretty easy to get shot up once you come out of those foxholes. I mean, since you're only trained, and you're going to get shredded, and you're going to end up losing a mass of troops, which is it's the backbone, it's the strength to run one of these blobs. So my thought is always deploy a little bit ahead of the objective, and I like to do that and usually put SMG teams in the front row. And then spearheaded by the Maxim machine gun right there. And then in my second row, I like to usually mix in my sappers, which have the yellow stripe on the back of the base right there, with rifle teams. And sometimes if I have the anti-tank rifles, stuff like that, I kind of like to sprinkle them in there through as well. And the reason I do this is if I can get up, roughly like 6 to 8 inches above that objective down there, if those tanks need to get within 16, they're going to have to usually get somewhere around here. So if I have to late game, I'll be able to take this infantry blob, push out, and only have to withstand 1 turn of defensive fire and going for assault if I need to push them off. So it's an aggressive deployment. Yeah, you'll be able to get assaulted a little bit easier, and you're going to be in firing range from a lot of units a little bit earlier in the game. But you're dug in infantry. I mean, if you stay gun to ground, they're going to need 5s to hit you. And then, just with all the dice rolls that are going to be needed to start plucking guys out of here, you're really not going to lose enough of guys to make your infantry blob ineffective, even if you deploy a little bit further up. And like I said, late game, you're going to have most platoons that are going to be sitting out here within that 16-inch range. They're going to be depleted. Even if they're a full, 3 or 5 tank platoon, you're still going to have a decent chance to run a full blob out, get into close combat, push them back off, and then hopefully either just totally take them out of the game or at least batter them well enough to where they won't be as effective in a counter charge or counter assault. And if they can't push you back, then you're going to end up winning the game late because they're going to be outside of 16 inches. So that's kind of my thought for setting these guys up in aggressive deployment. Some of the other things that I like to look at when I'm setting this up as well is if you have an aggressive player that likes to assault with tanks, we'll say, or anything along those lines, or even half tracks, if they punch in and they hit you and you're set up over here, even if you lose a combat, you still get pushed back, but you're still in a position to where you're defending the objective. You're not going to be pushed off the objective. You're going to have to lose, 2 or 3 rounds of combat to get thrown off this objective here. So by deploying a little bit ahead of it, you're giving yourself an opportunity to at least contest after losing 2 or 3 of these assaults, and then you can still kind of stay on there, dig in, reset your guys, and then set yourself up to at least be competitive and have to withstand a couple more assaults late game. So that's kind of why I usually like to deploy in the aggressive stance. Now I'm going to go over it, and we'll go over the passive defense. So here's a passive deployment setup that I used to run a lot for Strelkovy, but I don't do it as much right now. The passive setup is kind of hold your guys back, bubble wrap the objective, and keep as much distance as possible between you and I'm showing up here like there's actually somebody over there, but just to give you guys an idea of the table length. To set up so you have some distance created between you and the force coming in. And obviously the positive of this is you're going to be at a firing range from some stuff. I mean, obviously some of the bigger guns are going to be able to hit you, but you'll have that 16-inch distance modifier to hit you as well, so they'll be needing 6s. So if you stay back, gone to ground, dug in, and outside the 16-inch range, it's going to be really hard to pluck these guys out from some of the guns that might be lining up in the back. The plus side, I think, of this deployment is if you have a lot of good support fire, like, from Ziz guns, or you got some tanks on the table, it's going to take them a lot longer to push across the table as far as movement goes. And it's going to give you an opportunity to whittle those guys down before they get the opportunity to deal with your infantry over here. Usually if I do this, I like to keep my sappers in the back row, just to use them strictly for counter assaults and not have to worry about them getting murdered up in the front if they get an assault off or any other reasons like that. So this is kind of how I like to set it up for passive. The reason I don't like, I think, setting up like this, obviously if you run like Germans, Americans, Brits, you almost have to set up. You can't really set up aggressively. You have to set up back like this because you don't have the bodies to withstand that much damage, and you don't want to get your guys caught up in assaults earlier in the game because your platoon numbers are so low. But with the Soviets, I think you can afford to do that. But if you decide to deploy defensively like this, I don't think it's a bad idea either. The only downside is obviously if you lose a combat, you're going to be like 1 or 2 combats away from getting pushed off the objective. That's really not playing, I think, to the strengths of a Strelkovy mob. I kind of like having the aggressive deployment. But for the passive deployment, setting up like this, like I said, it's better if you have some heavy hitting support units, and if you also like bring a plane in your list or anything like that, because you're creating more distance, so you're gonna be able to get maybe an extra turn or two as far as getting some use out of your plane, or getting some decent rounds of fire out of your tanks and your Ziz guns and things like that. So if you're having your list built around some big support weapons, I think the passive works pretty well. I think if you're going to be bringing planes and stuff like that, you probably don't want to deploy aggressively anyway, just because you're going to lose the turn because they're going to get within that 16-inch bubble, and you want to create as much distance as possible so you get as much use out of your plane, hitting all parts of the army, not just the back row. So that's kind of my thoughts here for the passive deployment. Like I said, I'm personally not a big fan of it with Strelkovy, but I mean it does have its pluses and minuses. So we'll be back in a second to go over maybe some of the support units that I like to use with this list and how I like to use them. So here are some of the support units that I've really grown attached to as far as running the Strelkovy. I think they support the list really well. I'll start off with the Ziz guns. So usually if you're lucky enough and you can get 6 platoons in a full Strelkovy mob and still have some effective platoons in there, you'll be able to field 3. And I usually like to throw the Ziz guns out there because, they are really versatile. For deployment, I usually like to throw them in an area. Obviously I have no terrain out on the table right now, but I usually like to put them in an area where I get a clean range of fire, that I can cover a lot of the avenues that the assaulting army is going to be coming down. Sometimes I like to put them in the middle of the table in between both blobs so I can support both units, but sometimes it's nice to maybe push them off to one edge of the table, maybe on a flank, like somewhere over there or somewhere over there, and force the enemy to either push all of their assaulting forces to one side of the table and kind of box them in, and that enables me to move the second Strelkovy mob over and maybe come over and help support this objective if there's going to be nobody coming up on that side. So the Ziz guns, sometimes I like to use them to play like little head games with the attacking army and make them think that maybe the other side of the table is a little more accessible. And by doing that, I can get a whole nother blob of 30 guys over there while he's focusing down maybe on this one unit over here. And then also I can use my reserves to come in and just support one side of the table, because you're going to have numbers. And if it turns into, a fight in a phone booth, I'd rather have the Strelkovy mob in that fight than, a smaller German force or something along those lines. So the Ziz guns, like I said, they're a really good support unit, but I also kind of like to use them to dictate where the attacker is going to end up pushing his forces on the table. So that's kind of how I use my Ziz guns for the most part. Down here for my Katyushas, I always get mixed results with these guys, but I feel like they're a big enough threat on the table to where people have to kind of think twice about what they're doing, as far as, bringing infantry out across the table or being able to do some damage on some half tracks or some light armored vehicles. They're really effective against that, especially at distance. Usually with the Katyushas, I like to run them along the back edge, obviously behind buildings if I can. When I first started playing them, I would use them against light tanks, like like Panzer IVs or Stugs or anything like that with the top armor 1, and just supporting the Strelkovy with that, trying to take some of the armor off the table. And overall, I don't think they're really as effective for that. I really found out that they work really well, for me at least. Trying to take out the gun teams for the most part, whether you get some Nebelwerfers back there, artillery, Pack 40s, anything along those lines, I think they're awesome as far as pulling those guys out, especially after they fired and they got that 5-up save. Or taking out some infantry blobs and stuff when they come out of their foxholes getting ready to do any assaults and they have to start moving at distance. So I like using the Katyushas for that. I feel like they're almost a waste if you're burning them on taking out tanks, unless you absolutely have to. If you lost all your anti-tank, obviously, then you're going to have to use these guys. But if that's the case against the German list, for the most part, you're going to be in more trouble than what a Katyusha is going to be able to save you from. So I kind of like to use them, like I said, for taking out the support units that can really dig out the infantry, that can create smoke, pretty much make things harder for the assaulting units for the German forces, like like I said, like the tanks or the half tracks, make it harder for them to get in and really do some damage against some of these full blobs. So that's how I like to use the Katyushas over here. If I'm lucky enough to bring out some tanks, I didn't put them on the table right now because sometimes I mix that up. I know people swear by the ISU 122s. If you watch my battle reports, for the most part, I think they are, for me at least, they never seem to pan out. They just never do. And so I think I'm not going to use them as much, but I do see their value as far as the heavy hitting anti-tank guns. I mean, as far as popping Tigers and stuff like that, I mean, there really is no better unit, I think, for the Soviets to hit them at distance. Obviously, if you get to like the Su-100s and stuff like that, but I just don't have those models. I do really like defensively. I do like the T-34-85s just because of their versatility. They got a decent gun, decent armor, and decent price. So for 5 of those tanks, so I do like to mix them in sometimes. But and I always throw them in reserve as well, because them coming off some of the opposite table edges or the back end over there, the Strelkovy mobs are able to hold their ground long enough to where if those tanks come in, I think they're really effective as far as coming out of reserve and hitting the enemy tanks on side armor, rear armor, or just doing mop-up duty in middle game. So I like using the T-34-85s for that. For the planes, I do like to take the IL-2 a lot. I haven't taken it lately just because I've been trying some different units out and mixing things up. But IL-2, it's absolutely fantastic. But when I do run the IL-2, I try to do it when I'm going to be setting up more of as a passive defense, just so I can get some more turns with it shooting effectively, not being within that 16-inch bubble. And when I do bring it in, usually on turn 1 or 2, I try to hit the tanks that are going to be midfield and just out of range and do a little bit of damage on them there. And then once we get in the late game, I try to really focus down on some of the units that are going to be sitting in the backfield or at distance and shooting in, and try to get my points back as far as that goes. But I think, like I said, when you're defending, you got the plane, you're really limited on how much use you're going to get out of it based off of how aggressive the opposing player is going to be. Because if they're going to be getting up in your face early and really trying to make a push on the objectives, obviously you're not going to be able to use that plane because of the 16-inch bubble. So it kind of really, they kind of dictate the amount of use you're going to get out of that plane. I feel like when you're defending, I like using the planes more when I'm attacking, because I can create the space that I need to use it effectively against the units that I want to use it against. So the IL-2, I like to take it, but it seems like it's really situational, and it really depends on what kind of person I'm playing against as far as how it goes for defense. So that's kind of my thoughts as far as support units that I like to run with this list overall. I'll be back in a second to go over if you're in the unfortunate scenario where you have to attack with your Strelkovy, especially with this setup right here. But, that'll be a short little thing because I think most of you guys kind of get the idea of what that's going to be like. So we'll be back in a flash. So I'm back here. We're going to go over just a quick little briefing here on how I like to tackle my Strelkovy. This is really nothing special. There's no finesse in this. This is just the giant blunt hammer that I'm going to try to smash into my opponent. If I end up having to attack with Strelkovy, it really is lineup. I like lining one blob up along one flank, and then the second blob I like to work into the middle and almost cut the table in half and try to get 50 or 60 of those bases to focus on one objective, one giant mess, and just try to win this game in close combat, because that's where I think your strength is in your numbers with these guys, and it really does make a difference if you get these guys up close. And the reason too I like to kind of push up the middle and on one flank is because if you push on the flank with one of your blobs, usually the units in front of you are going to be the ones that are firing at you, and then if you push another one up the middle, anybody on that flank and usually in the middle, they're going to have to deal with that blob. So as long as they're taking fire, you're creating almost like a one-on-one situation here with your Strelkovy blob. Yeah, you're going to take casualties going across the table, but you're going to get in there and you're most likely going to be able to steamroll whatever is going to be on that side of the table, where your other Strelkovy mob over here, they're really just going to be there to take wounds, take fire, and be a distraction and keep the middle and that other flank occupied as you're pushing up the table. So with my infantry, I like to be aggressive. I like to just move every turn, obviously use cover the best that I can. But, when you got, 25, 30 bases part of each one of these mobs, I mean, you can afford to maybe not jump behind cover, and be a little more aggressive with your movement every turn. Probably wouldn't go at the double unless you absolutely have to, just because, with that, with fours to hit you, with threes to hit you, some units that have that heavy amount of firepower, like flak tracks or anything like that, they will shred your numbers pretty quick, especially if they focus their fire down on you. As far as support goes, for when I'm in the attack, like I said, if I'm usually going to have the Katyushas in the list and the Ziz guns. Katyushas, I'm just going to bombard that one objective. I don't care what's on it. I'm just going to keep throwing dice at it and just slowly try to keep them pinned down, peel off some units, have whoever I'm playing against have to make those motivation rolls to unpin. Just like I said, just cause as many issues with the Katyushas as possible. You're not really looking for damage output. You're just kind of looking to harass and be annoying. I think with them, you're gonna pull some bases off with them. Especially if you're bombing infantry or gun teams. But I think it's more about really weakening the unit's going to be defending the opposite side of you, the objective that you're going to be focusing on attacking. For the Ziz guns, usually if I'm attacking, I like to keep them in the middle of the table as well, just to, like I said, cut it in half. So if anybody tries pulling tanks over or anything like that, you're going to have at least 2 or 3 turns of fire before those tanks are able to get in and do any damage against this blob that's going to be attacking on that side. Same thing with the planes. Obviously, if you're running a Strelkovy mob and you're attacking, most likely you're not going to be getting into assaults turn 3. It's going to take you a little while to get there, but while that's happening, you're going to be able to fly that IL-2 across the back line of that table, and you're going to be able to just, shred what's ever back there, whether if they are hiding tigers back there, or, they got their artillery or they got their infantry dug in. Whatever they have going on back there, that IL-2 is going to be able to dig them out for, a couple turns. So if you're lucky enough to be on the attack and have an IL-2 in the list, I think that's one of the best support options. But, obviously it's not going to happen as much because you're running an infantry company. Same thing if you bring the T-34-85s to support these guys. I like to usually use them to support whatever assaulting infantry I have. So if these guys are pushing up, maybe put my T-34-85s on that side. Try to get them another aggressive assaulting unit to run alongside the main assaulting Strelkovy company, while the other one is, like I said, taking most of the heat going up the middle of the table. So that's kind of my thoughts with how I like to run my Strelkovy, the tactics I like to use on the table. Obviously, this is the first tactical video, so there's probably going to be a couple holes in it. But like I said, if you guys have any suggestions or any ideas, or if you guys are looking at what I'm playing and what I'm doing, and you have some ideas of maybe how I could run it better or some better supporting options for what I'm doing, please feel free, man. Send me a message, comment, all that kind of stuff. I like the feedback. It also makes me a better player. So, and that in turn makes better videos for you guys to watch. So, I hope this helps some of the other players, some of the veteran players. Like I said, if there's something in here that you think that could help me, like I said, shoot me a message, let me know. But like I said, thanks for watching, like, subscribe, all that jazz. We'll try to do another one of these a little bit later, maybe like next month or next couple of weeks for some different lists. So like I said, thanks for watching.